And, the whole ethos of Sycamore Equity is to be able to give back to the communities that we're in. We're not looking for zero sum where, I win, you lose. Rather, it's trying to think more creatively in our business practices, how either everybody can win or if we invest sacrificially, how other people can flourish.
Welcome to the Build to Billions podcast, where we guide successful entrepreneurs and investors on the journey from millions to billions. And we believe the key to scaling your wealth and compounding your business starts every single day with a mindset and practice of stewardship over ownership. Hey, I'm excited about our next guest. He's out of originally from the great state of California, and now he's in Colorado. He's going to be talking about housing affordability. He's going to be talking about making an impact, and so much more. Please welcome to the show with me, Glenn Bean. Glenn, how we doing?
Doing great. Thanks, Brett. It's great to be here.
Excellent. And for our listeners, get to know you. Maybe tell quickly a little bit about your story and your focus and what you're doing there at Sycamore Equity.
Sounds good. I was born in Oakland, California. My dad was a pastor and I grew up in a parsonage. However, that part of my story kind of went on pause for a while. Went to business school, consulting, worked in tech. But, after having a family and some kids here in Boulder, decided I wanted to address something that really had purpose in life. And, I looked at housing affordability as a big challenge here in the United States. So even a decade or two ago, a lot of homeowners could get into home ownership, buying a house that was priced, typically call it 3 to 5x what their income was. That was a decent rule of thumb. Whatever your salary, whatever your household income was, that's about the house you could afford. But due to a whole variety of factors, the price of houses across the U.S. is more like 5 to 7x people's income today. In some communities, it's even higher than that, 9, 10, 11 times people's income. So getting a down payment and the overall affordability is just not there. Add on to that interest rates are at a relative high right now. And a lot of people just can't get into home ownership. Well, as we started looking at that, we talked to a lot of nonprofit leaders who wanted to get people into home ownership for their staff, people who need to be present in their communities to do their best work, to be incarnationally present. And it was so hard for talent attraction and retention to get people into their communities. So we thought, well, what if we could set up a fund that would invest in single-family owner-occupied homes, which is an asset class that's not that easy to get into, that would provide decent returns to investors, but it would also give these staff members that are making a huge impact in their communities a chance, that bridge from rental to home ownership, and to bring both that financial stability, but also, just sort of the peace of mind so that they can go back to doing their jobs.
That's incredible. So yeah, you're taking the housing crisis and you're making an impact in a way that makes it more attainable for more people to have financial security, stability, ownership, and I would say even location stability, right? I mean, moving is such a stressful thing, and even just the thought of not having a home is just it's such a dynamic thing that needs to be solved for. Okay, so let's dive right into this, Glenn. So, what would you say is one of the top things that you've gleaned as far as wisdom or secrets as it pertains to trying to do something about this to make a big dent in the housing crisis?
Well, the number one thing is there are financial returns in this, but you layer onto that additional value creation. So for employers, it's unlocking, reducing that cost for talent attraction and retention. People will move to certain areas if they have this type of benefit. People will stay in jobs longer. Sometimes even at modest pay if they know that their housing is stable. So there's, both a financial cost and an organizational cost to employers. But then there's a huge benefit to the home buyers. They have a chance to start building equity, take tax advantages of having a mortgage, improve the house. So the home buyer benefits. But then ultimately, whoever the investor is will also benefit because there's the organization that they care about, whatever this nonprofit is, will have better employees doing better work and serving the community better. And so it's taking capital that's ready to invest somewhere and benefiting three different stakeholders.
Okay, that's key. So it's understanding the strategy behind business owner and employer, right? The employee, right? For retention and benefits, and longevity to stay there, as well as the investor to make a return. Everybody wins. That's step number one. What step or wisdom number two here?
Um, yeah, wisdom number two is uh, this is something where if you're trying to do this on your own, you're going to run into a whole lot of regulations, IRS guidelines, an enormous amount of fees, fines, and other, SEC red flags. So we talk to a lot of organizations who do something like this or want to do something like this, and similar with the investors. And the sad truth is, behind a lot of good intention, there are an enormous amount of pitfalls. So we've invested, pretty heavily across the board to iron all those out and just make it turnkey, both for the employer, the home buyer, and the investor.
Okay, so let's break that down. What does that look like?
Well, one of the biggest things is we can have three types of capital invest. An employer can invest off their balance sheet, and that's great. It's an employee benefit. But there can be affinity investors who say, I've moved some money out of, say, an index fund, out of my Charles Schwab brokerage account. This is a decent investment, and I'm excited about what it's doing in my community. And that capital is just eligible for capital gains. But then the third stream where people get really excited about it is if you have a balance in a donor advised fund or a family foundation, you can actually take that money. It's already tax advantaged. So the investor, that is the donor advisor, already has enormous returns from that. But then you can put that to work, supporting an organization that you already care about. And then the returns come back to your donor advised fund for future charitable giving.
Okay, so it sounds like that's definitely a dynamic, niche here. So it sounds like donor advised funds can now be used through Sycamore Equity to fund these single family home. Would you say developments, or would you say funding for home ownership, or how would you put that?
It's just the purchase. Right now, it's just the financing mechanism. So we're not a developer. We're not building anything. Rather, we have a nonprofit whose charitable purpose is to make these investments. So we originate these assets. So the donor advised fund works with our nonprofit, the Sycamore Foundation, and then the Sycamore Foundation makes that investments in the homes.
Okay, got it. And so basically, it's a great, efficient, charitable way to finance the purchases of new homes, or I mean, it doesn't have to be brand new, but it could just be new home buyers.
Home purchases, and technically it can happen after the fact too. So say someone's gotten in over their skis a little, say life nips them. We're actually working with a campus minister out in Virginia who had twins unexpectedly, and all of a sudden that monthly payment looks a little bit daunting. We can buy down the mortgage with this exact same thing.
Okay, so let's walk through a scenario to bring this to life. Okay, so what are the qualifications? What's an average deal? What are some of the things that people need to know about this? Let's just start with the actual homeowner, and then we'll work our way through the investor and the business owner.
Yep. The homeowner needs to be a staff member, ideally at a 501c3, but we can technically set them up for employers who are not 501c3s. And we work with the employer to choose, who's eligible in the program. It is not an ERISA benefit. And so it's more like an executive compensation package. And so because there are a limited amount of funds, basically any employee can be eligible, or it could be a certain threshold. From there, if there's a first mortgage involved, they still have to qualify for that in all the traditional ways: debt to income, credit score, etc. We don't want anybody to get again, in so deep that they end up having a problem in a mortgage that they can't service. So we work with a lot of mission-aligned mortgage lenders who will go through all the standard credit qualification processes.
Okay, so we're speaking with Glenn Bean here, by the way, solving home ownership and affordability for flourishing communities, making a difference, making an impact. If you want to learn more, you can go to sycamoreequity.com. That's sycamoreequity.com. So, Glenn, okay, so I'll make sure I caught that. If I work for a 501c3, right? That's the first step. Number two, it could be a refi, or it could also be a purchase. Give me an average deal that has happened recently, so to bring this to life.
Yeah, it's pretty common. we worked with a pastor down in Scottsdale. It was actually director of communications, about a $900,000 purchase. They have an amazing story. They bought a house in Atlanta, right when they were married, started at 300,000, sold at 500,000, but moved to Scottsdale. Median price where they are is 1.2 million. I mean, they still found a below average home, but it was 900K, and it just, it wasn't meeting where they were given the down payment they had, et cetera. So we ended up investing 270,000 in that house to go along with about a $550,000 mortgage, and then the home buyer brought up the balance. So it's almost a synthetic, like, hey, the asset in the ground is worth 900,000, but to the home buyer, it has this feeling that it's more like a 650 home. And that's how they're able to service the mortgage payments.
Okay, let's break down that 270. What's the rate on the 270?
So it's an investment in the home. There's not actually a rate. It's not a debt. And that's really important for a couple of legal reasons. One, it's not compensation. You're not paying employment taxes, et cetera, et cetera. Rather, it's an investment in the home.
Okay.
What that particular one was structured was, for X percentage in, when the home is refied or sold, you get X percentage out. And so in the Scottsdale market, that's probably a 7 to 9% return. It is possible to juice those returns a little bit, and we work with investors on that. So for instance, we can say instead of 10% in, you get 10% out at refi or sale. We can structure it 10% in and then say 15% out at refi or sale. But as we set up the fund per organization, that's a bit of a conversation to balance investor returns with home buyer benefit.
Okay, so let's walk through this. I want to buy a house, 900,000. Right, I can come up with a debt of 550, but instead of taking the rest of the down payment myself, I say, look, I want to partner with Sycamore Equity. They'll put up 270. I'll give a certain percentage away of the upside as the homeowner. Sycamore Equity, you maybe get 7 to 9%, maybe more, depending on when there's a refinance event and when there's a sale. I guess that becomes the next question. What if someone just owns for 30 years? How does Sycamore get paid?
Yeah.
And doesn't refi?
Yeah, we still have a term on it. So it caps out at 15 years, at which point it has to be rolled over again. Depending on the terms, it could be as low as 10 or as high as 30. That's a little bit of a conversation. That's a parameter we can set. Just like with mortgages, you can choose different product types.
Okay.
We typically have 15, knowing that the typical homeowner's in their home for 7 to 10 years.
Okay. All right. So let's say 10 years is the worst. And so let's say I hypothetically I was an investor and I put 270 into this one deal and nothing happens for 10 years. Worst case would be, let's say it's a 10-year note. They would need to be refi at that point, and I get paid back my 270. Do I get addition to that, or is it like a cash out refi? Is that what we're hoping for that? Even though the person didn't move,
it's plus the home appreciation, plus if there's a multiplier there on the pricing. So, in a market like Scottsdale, 270 probably turns into 400.
Right.
Maybe 500 in 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, so they just have to get a cash out refi. I've seen recently, I don't know, you tell me, but a lot of these banks, if you live in the house, they're either hesitant or not as likely to give you cash out refis. Have you noticed that, or is that not really an issue? You think you can, do you get a HELOC on that to offset it, or what are you seeing cash out refis? No problem.
We haven't run into that as much of a problem. And again, some of the, lending partners we're working with, they're local banks and credit unions. Mm-hmm. They're excited about picking up the phone and helping these people get to 100% ownership. That's the stated goal. And so I don't think that would necessarily be a stumbling block 10 years hence. Okay.
So let's shift from the homeowner. I guess we kind of talked to the investor here. He's got to be willing to wait some time. He's got to be willing to not receive any cash flow along the way, sounds like, right? Or maybe you can correct me on that. Is Sycamore Equity a fund or just the facilitator? How does that work? Are you diversified, or is it single assets that this investor is going into? What does that look like?
So the investor would invest in the employer that they're interested in. So it could be Boys and Girls Club. It could be the local church. It could be, the homeless shelter, whatever the case is. We're working with a school district here in Colorado. And so it can be a fund. And if it's multi-asset, then you end up having a little bit of, rolling returns on when the different assets mature. But at its atomic level, we're kind of talking about, hey, if it's, a couple of investors in a single asset, then that's the conversation we've been having so far. And we can do that too.
Okay, I think this is interesting. Obviously, scale and consistency and deals that are going down will help to make it, I think, even more tangible here. Let's go to the employer. Okay, so now I'm the employer. I'm a 501c3, right? I'm a nonprofit. And I'm like, this is great. I can help my employees. I can also help other groups that have similar employees. We're in this together. It's going to be is it tax deferral? I mean, a donor advised fund, it's just charitable, right? So they already have their them as a company already have a donor advised fund for their company. Let's just say they're able to put it in there, and they're able to then fund these deals. Is that a fair summary, or what did I miss there?
So employer participation can be on a spectrum, and it's gone from 0 to 1. So we've got a couple who just say, we'll set this up, we'll offer it to our employees, but no source of capital here. We're just, we put our stamp of approval, and we've got the employees that are part of it. On the flip side, we have a couple employers who say, we want to fund this entirely. This is a negative cost benefit. It's something we'll have on our balance sheet that'll grow over time, and it solves a huge problem, and then we have full control over what the program looks like. But then the most common is in between, where it's sort of a matching. The employer puts in some money, but then they also talk to their donor investor base and say, hey, we could really leverage a couple of those other streams of capital, matching, 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 4-to-1, whatever the case is, to amplify this thing. In which case, we as the manager set up whatever sort of operating agreement suits that capital stack.
Okay, we're speaking with Glenn Bean, by the way. SycamoreEquity.com. He's also an Oakland A's fan. And if you've seen the show Moneyball, he's not necessarily related to that gentleman there, but he does like the Oakland A's. All kidding aside, so it's being really strategic with, and the reason I bring that up is because Moneyball is like the most strategic movie you're like ever seen, right? Especially when it comes to sports, and I love sports, love baseball. So it's being super strategic with charitable impact, right?
Yep.
Donor advised funds is a vehicle. Yep. Employers, it's maybe I call it charity ball, right? It's like, so I mean, I love it, Glenn. I love how strategic you're being, and I love how you're carving out this niche here to help these people and everybody who needs to have, and wants to have and is trying to afford a home, right? And is also trying to make an impact by working for nonprofits. And so, gosh, how can we best help besides getting the word out, Glenn? Like, break it down for the entrepreneur. Like, let's say he had an extra $1 million of revenue this year and he wants to make an impact. And you're like, wow, like if you just set up this donor advised fund, if you just worked with Sycamore and if you just did this, like give us kind of like a little step by step and what that benefit versus, let's say, paying $300,000 of tax.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what it is. We would work with that entrepreneur or whoever it was who had their donor advised fund, and we would point the money in their community where they wanted it to go. And really, it's just setting up a program. There's some education for the home buyer. There's some education for the employer. You want to make sure it's kind of the right profile of people. It's typically not for a 22-year-old, just right out of school, because maybe it is more appropriate they rent. But man, so often people have their first child. They want to put down roots. They want to serve an organization. That's the home buyer profile that's most common. So we would set up a fund with the entrepreneur. We'd work with their donor advised fund. It could be, a faith-based one like NCF or Signature or Waterstone, but it can be just any old one, Fidelity, Vanguard, Charles Schwab, charitable. And we would go through that process to identify the eligible candidates, make the investment, and then, we service it for the lifetime of the asset.
Oh, this is cool. What haven't I asked you so far that I should have asked you that you want to really make sure you share with the audience?
Well, you brought up the Oakland A's, and so that that checks a lot of boxes with me. I think the the reason is like, why this, why now? Is there's innovation in home finance right now with home equity agreements. This is a relatively new and novel thing. It's not brand new, but in the past 5 to 10 years, it's picked up some steam. And there's a securitization rating methodology. So Wall Street's getting more comfortable with these assets. So that's one. Two, donor advised funds, not brand new, but in the past decade or so, they've also gotten a lot more popular in usage and flexibility and clarification of what the IRS says you can or cannot do with them. And then three, the housing crisis is something that has its roots 20, 25 years ago. And, a lot of folks thought the pandemic would flatline housing prices, and rather it just accelerated them and made it so much harder. So it's an acute problem with two new sort of pieces. And what Sycamore Equity is doing is harnessing all of those to have value creation for all the stakeholders involved.
Yeah, it feels like a perfect storm in a good way. I mean, tough way in that it's getting harder and harder to own, but perfect storm for these things becoming more well known, like donor advised fund, and then now what you're doing with that twist on it. It's interesting. Our strategies. It's interesting. It goes back to the very long tax code. We help people build capital gains tax exit plans for businesses, Bitcoin, real estate, and the tax code goes over 100 years. But we combine it with the trust, and we fuse the two together, and it solves the big problem. And so it's taking these pieces of the puzzle or this Rubik's cube and moving it in such a way that unlocks what we call freedom and impact. Right. And it's a part of this 84 to $100 trillion passing of the wealth from the baby boomers to the millennials in the next, 15 years or so, largest wealth transfer in the history of the planet. And so our vision is to help people unlock that capital to multiply freedom and impact. And it sounds like it's you align another in that too, unlock the capital, right? That's, either stuck in the business or not very tax efficient, or someone who wants to give charitable, to point it like a laser at this housing crisis. So I love what you're doing, Glenn. This is really great. That being said, are you ready for the lightning round?
Let's do it.
All right. Knowing what you know now, if you go back to your 20-year-old self, what's the one gold nugget? Make sure you tell yourself to do.
Ski more days.
Where would you be? Would you be Tahoe, or would you be in Colorado if you had to pick?
I have fallen in love with these Colorado mountains. And so, I would be right here, kind of in the thick of it, sort of the Copper Mountain, Winter Park, Breckenridge. It's amazing terrain.
That's awesome. Great. Question number 2, number one book you've recommended or gifted the most in the past year?
Oh, man. Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. PSA for any parent, especially if you're a dad out there. Basically, smartphones are taking the attention of all of our kids who are going through a formative growth period. It's increasing anxiety, depression, suicide. If you are raising kids or just care about kind of where Gen Z is, you got to read this book. You got to see what smartphones are doing to everybody in society, but particularly people whose brains are getting rewired. It is both horrifying and something that we can get ahead of.
Okay, one more time on the name of the book.
The Anxious Generation by
The
Jonathan
Anxious.
Haidt. Yeah, he's an NYU professor at Stern.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for sharing that. Next question. Number one leadership quote or theme that you strive to live by?
I think it's all about being a servant leader. And so I think that's more of a theme. And so in everything we do, even though we're pressing forward and to absolutely demand results, whether it's our employees, our stakeholders, our customers, it's always considering other people better than ourselves. And it's such an important value to us.
Perfect. Next question. Number one way you're using Chat GPT or different AI that you like to use?
Well, I mean, I did just plan a trip to San Francisco with my daughter, and so that was pretty fun to pick things up. But I'd say a lot of these, thorny financial regulations where you can go read the law but if you're not a trained legal scholar, it can be very complex. And so if you start having a conversation with ChatGPT, they'll break it down for you and at least point you to the right direction, hopefully with citations, so that you can start understanding some of the regulatory thicket.
I like that. Next question. What are you most curious about right now?
That is a good question. You know, I think I'm trying to narrow it down to one thing. Um, I spent a lot of time, yeah, uh, I've been talking to some friends about the root of awe, and there's another guy who did some research on what is it as humans that make us just really in awe of something, whether it's nature or these collective activities or music, and there are neuropsychological reactions that we have. But there's also just something inherent like, oh yeah, no, that's that feeling I have when I'm, just blown away by the beauty of the stars. And so I'm curious about how, like, one, the nature of that, and two, how to get more of that in my life in 2025.
The root of awe. I'm curious now too. Awesome. All right. So this has been awesome. Glenn, I appreciate your time. I want to finish with this last question, and it's all about stewardship over ownership. And so what is the best way that you practice that, right? That we're a steward with the gifts we've been given and to be a blessing and help to others. How do you practice that versus ownership, which sometimes leads to, not being as, grateful and as giving?
I think right now it is with this time. And, the whole ethos of Sycamore Equity is to be able to give back to the communities that we're in. We're not looking for zero sum, where, I win, you lose. Rather, it's trying to think more creatively in our business practices, how, either everybody can win, or if we invest sacrificially, how other people can flourish. And so I think stewarding that time and just kind of that, that ability and those connections, to call in and, help out a pastor who's making $60,000 and working in a, non-white community. That's the thing we want to be doing.
Glenn Bean, I want to thank you on the show. I want to thank you for fighting the good fight, helping people get home ownership, helping people be more charitable, helping people to make a difference and an impact for communities and what's top crisis in America, top crisis in the world, which is affordable housing, attainable workforce housing. Keep doing what you're doing. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. If you can remember one last time, would you mind us one last time? People want to connect you. Where they can find you?
Best place is our website, www.sycamoreequity.com. Shoot us a note. We'd love to talk through what it would look like for you to be an investor or for your organization to set up a fund to attract and retain talent.
Amazing. Thank you, Glenn. Also want to thank all of our listeners for listening to another episode of the Buildings Billions podcast, also streaming on Capital Gains Tax Solutions YouTube and podcast. We're here with you, the successful entrepreneur and investor, on your journey from millions to billions, because that's the same journey we're on as well. And we encourage you to practice every single day a mindset of stewardship over ownership, and also practice billionaire biblical principles so you can give more or all of it away to make an impact for MVPs and for your community, make a difference, just like Glenn Bean is talking about today. Please take some action. Please share this with someone who can be encouraging and challenged too. We appreciate everyone out there, and we will talk to you all again real soon. Bye now.